Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are very excited to have you at Greater Farallones Association's Afternoon at the Lagoon online event. Today's event is going to be your virtual magical mystery tour of Bolinas Lagoon. So all aboard. And we're going to start today off with a few words from Maria Brown, the superintendent of our partner, the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, followed by a few words from Deb Self, the executive director of Greater Farallones Association. So Maria, why don't you take it away?
Hello, and thank you so much, Kate. I am so excited to be joining everyone here tonight. I just wish that I could see you and interact with you, and I can't wait for us to be able to get together in person again. Bolinas Lagoon is an incredibly important place. It has not only been recognized internationally as a significant wetland, it is also recognized nationally as a national marine sanctuary. And there are only 14 of these in the entire country. So we have an incredibly important place right here in our backyard, which you will learn more about tonight. And during these times when federal resources have not been as great as we have wanted to protect this amazing place, we have been incredibly fortunate to partner with the Greater Farallones Association, who has really taken the lead on restoration efforts for the sanctuary. And I'm so very excited to introduce Deb Self tonight, the Executive Director of the Greater Farallones Association, and her leading the efforts here in Bolinas Lagoon. So welcome, Deb.
Thanks so much, Maria. Hi, friends. It was really exciting to see the list of folks who were attending the event. I'm really glad that you can be here tonight. This afternoon, our second afternoon at the Lagoon. In December, we held our first of a 3-event series, and that first event was focused on the wildlife and the geology of Bolinas Lagoon. It was super fun. If you missed it, you can actually see the recorded event, and I highly recommend it. You can look in the chat box for a link, and hope you'll go. You can always go and see it a second time. Today is a little different. We're going to zoom out, and we're going to actually take a tour all around Bolinas Lagoon. We're going to be focusing on the truly unique wildlife habitats that are a part of the lagoon's ecosystems. We're going to talk about the challenges that they face now, as well as the challenges that they will be facing in the future. And we're going to highlight our plans to restore the vital wetland habitats. Our aim, in partnership with the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary and others, including Marin County and the community here, is to restore and support the natural processes that will allow the shoreline in Bolinas to be a healthy ecosystem and to move with the times, to be resilient in the face of climate change and other challenges. During our last stop on this magical mystery tour, we're going to zoom in to a special corner of the lagoon, which is the south end. And we're going to share our exciting plans for restoring this ecologically vital shoreline and making sure that it can adapt and thrive as part of a healthy ecosystem in Bolinas Lagoon. So thanks so much for your interest and for being here with us today. We appreciate your support and your friendship. And take it away, Kate.
All right, thank you very much, Deb. I want to go through a few logistics before we dive into the tour. First of all, I'm sure you all realized that you are muted and your webcams are off, so you'll only be seeing the Greater Farallones Association team today. But that doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from you. So please use the question box throughout the event to type in any questions you'd like us to answer. If you're having any trouble with audio or video connection, use that question box as well, and either Olivia or Elaine will be able to troubleshoot your tech needs. As Deb mentioned, we recorded our first event and put it on our YouTube channel. We're going to do the same thing here at our second event. So after that recording is ready to go live, I'll send an email out to all of our registrants and share that link with you. So please share that link with your friends and family. We definitely want other folks who are interested in Bolinas Lagoon to learn about all the great things happening around this special estuary. Okay, now I'd like to take a few moments to introduce our team, and it's actually a perfect segue because today is the International Women's Day in Science. So we've got a great team of female scientists here for you tonight. You've already met Maria Brown, our partner with the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, and you met Deb Self, our executive director. I talked about Olivia and Elaine, but now I'll actually introduce them. Olivia Johnson and Elaine Chappell are our tech team for the night, and they're also going to be helping us with our poll questions and our trivia questions, because no virtual event is complete without some free swag. Your tour operators for today are Dr. Wendy Cordish, our geological oceanographer. She will be talking about the habitat at each stop and the importance that those habitats play in the function of the Bolinas Lagoon ecosystem. Sarah Hutto is our climate program coordinator, and she will dive into some of the challenges that those habitats are facing. And then I will talk about the solutions being implemented to address those challenges. And if anyone doesn't know me, I'm Kate Bimrose, and I am the Bolinas Lagoon program coordinator for Greater Farallones Association. All right, after the tour, we will have a question and answer period. So please keep those questions coming. We'll try and get to as many as we can. And the tour today is going to be really great. We're going to start off at Seadrift Lagoon. Then we're going to head over to Stinson Beach. We will move north to our very own private Kent Island. Then we will take a stop at the north end, followed by our exciting news for work at the south end. But before we start the tour, why don't we see who we have here with us? We'll get a good sense of who has gone on their own magical tour of Bolinas Lagoon. So when everybody registered, we asked you a couple questions to get a sense of who would be joining us tonight. And you can see we have a nice broad spectrum of folks that have never seen the lagoon, been maybe once a year, or those folks that live locally and the lagoon is their backyard. So we have a really great mix of people here tonight. I'm so glad that you came to learn more about the lagoon. And whether you've never seen it with your own eyes or you live in its backyard, you all recognize the importance of Bolinas Lagoon. You're interested in Bolinas Lagoon, and you should be, because the lagoon is a beautiful place. This 1,100-acre estuary, as Maria said, is world-renowned, and it holds a variety of unique habitat types that support a great diversity of species. At our last event, we learned from Dr. Wendy that Bolinas Lagoon is situated right on top of the San Andreas Fault. And because of that, the lagoon itself is a tidal embayment. It's separated by the Pacific Ocean with a naturally occurring barrier feature, also known as the Stinson Beach Spit. And I'm moving my mouse around here. Hopefully you can see that. Inside the lagoon, because it's a shallow bay, we have a variety of habitats that are able to form. So from the deep channels to the mud flat, wetlands, marsh, and upland habitat, they all serve a very important function for the health and sustainability of Bolinas Lagoon. These habitat types are very rare along the coast. Another nearby estuary, also known as San Francisco Bay, has undergone a lot of pressures over the years, far more than Bolinas Lagoon, and it's lost about 70% of its shoreline habitat due to development. That makes places like Bolinas that much more critical and important as a refuge for wildlife to live and breed. And many wildlife species do live and flourish in Bolinas Lagoon. Not only is the lagoon a pupping site for harbor seals. At our last event, we learned that over 200 harbor seals were born in Bolinas Lagoon in 2019 alone. But we also learned from Kirsten Lindquist, who manages our Beach Watch program, that the lagoon is a major stopover area along the Pacific Flyway. So about 50,000 migrating birds stop in Bolinas Lagoon to rest and feed on their journeys. Not to mention the fact that the lagoon hosts about 245 different species of birds that either live there or visit all year round. And we also love Bolinas Lagoon. Here are some responses from the second question we asked when you all registered. We wanted to get an idea of the types of activities you like to enjoy when you visit the lagoon, and it's pretty obvious that you can do just about anything there, from surfing and kayaking to just walking, hiking, relaxing and enjoying the scenery. Some folks like to take a lot of photos of Bolinas Lagoon. I know I have a ton of them. And some people just enjoy the lagoon when they're driving around. I do that a lot myself. So Bolinas Lagoon is very important. It's beautiful. Its habitats are unique, but unfortunately it is facing a lot of challenges due to climate change. Those challenges include sea level rise, increased storm surge, increasing temperatures and periods of drought, and habitat range shifts, which is when species move north for cooler waters and cooler temperatures. But along with that also comes the spread of invasive species. These challenges will impact the shoreline, the habitat, and the function of Bolinas Lagoon, but that is where Greater Farallones comes in. We are working to protect and conserve these important vital systems in order for their natural processes to evolve. We are planning to use nature-based solutions, and we'll learn more about nature-based solutions later on, in order to allow these systems to evolve naturally, adapt to climate change impacts, and be resilient to future challenges. Together, Greater Farallones Association and our partners are working towards a shared vision of a healthy, resilient, and adaptable Bolinas Lagoon. And if you want any more information at all about any of the work that we're doing in Bolinas or our Bolinas program, please feel free to visit our website. And Olivia or Elaine, you can drop that website link into the questions box. All right, well, let's start the tour and let's make our first stop over at Seadrift Lagoon with Wendy.
All right, thank you, Kate. And what a beautiful and unique and amazing habitat it is. But we start off here in Seadrift Lagoon. So in that photo, you can see there's that whole big sand spit that Kate pointed out earlier. But if you look carefully, there's a smaller man-made lagoon constructed inside. And that inner lagoon is called Seadrift Lagoon, and it's full of seawater that comes from Bolinas Lagoon through controlled culverts. And if you're lucky enough to paddle these glassy, calm waters, you'll spot a variety of animals that pop up. You can see seabirds and shorebirds float by, shrimp and crabs, maybe even a leopard shark lurking near the bottom. But it's a pretty peaceful and beautiful place. But Sarah, it's probably going to be impacted by some climate change challenges. So will you share those with us?
Right, Wendy. Well, those crabs that you mentioned, they might be fun to spot if you're paddling through Seadrift Lagoon, but they're not good for the health of the lagoon itself. These are invasive European green crabs. Invasive meaning that they're not native to this area and that they spread really easily. And they actually hitchhiked their way from Europe over to California in the late 1980s. And when they reached Seadrift Lagoon, their population really exploded because, except for those controlled culverts you mentioned, Seadrift is really closed off from Bolinas Lagoon and the open ocean. And so there's way fewer predators inside Seadrift. And so by 2014, the population actually reached 350,000 crabs in Seadrift Lagoon, posing a really significant threat to becoming like an invasive crab nursery for Bolinas Lagoon. Now, green crabs are really not great for these healthy estuarine ecosystems because they have voracious appetites. They will eat all the available food, including native clams, oysters, small Dungeness crabs. They'll compete with other species for some of that food. And all of those species are really critical to the habitat. And a few of them are directly connected to our local economy through commercial fisheries. Now, it's really difficult to control invasive species in an open system. And future impacts, current and future impacts from climate change, like warming water, often favor the spread of invasive species over native species. So this all sounds a little dire, but luckily in Seadrift Lagoon, there is some good news, which Kate can share with us.
Yes, I can. Okay, so what's the solution? Well, the European Green Crab Removal Project is the solution. Ever since 2009, Greater Farallones Association has partnered with UC Davis, the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center, and the Seadrift Homeowners Association to conduct an annual removal effort in Seadrift Lagoon. What does that mean? Well, basically every year during the summer, the project spans about 4 weeks. And each day during that week, I get to paddle out around the perimeter of Seadrift Lagoon and drop 90 baited traps. Those traps stay underwater for about 24 hours catching crabs. The next day we come back, we remove the crabs, and we measure them. We also record other physical characteristics, including any injuries or damage to the crabs. And then the crabs are frozen, but it doesn't end there. The crabs are actually donated to local farms in the area. This is a photo of me standing on a compost pile at Gospel Flat Farm in Bolinas. We also donate crabs to Slide Ranch in Seadrift Lagoon, or I'm sorry, in Stinson Beach. And the crabs are really great because they bring important nutrients back to the soil. So this is really what makes the project surf to turf. Since we started the project in 2009, numbers of those crabs in Seadrift Lagoon have reduced significantly. They've gone from that 350,000 number down to about 50,000. And we're seeing the resurgence of more local species like pipefish, sculpin, and shrimp in Seadrift Lagoon, which is great. We also, and just this last year, we found this out, partners that we are working with, researchers on the East Coast that are studying the invasive green crab, have realized that the population in Seadrift is relatively restricted. So it's actually not spreading to green crabs in Bolinas Lagoon as bad as we thought. They did some genetic testing for populations from Seadrift Lagoon versus those in Bolinas Lagoon, and they found that the crabs in Bolinas Lagoon are more genetically similar to the green crabs found on the outer coast, whereas the crabs in Seadrift Lagoon are sort of their own genetic makeup. So this is a huge win for the ecosystem, and it's a really great win for the project as well, because it's a great teachable moment. We really wouldn't be able to do the project without our volunteers. We bring a lot of people out and we are able to talk to them about the importance of ecosystem balance and how marine invasives can really throw that balance off. So while they're working in the lagoon, they have this hands-on experience. They're learning about the issues, and together that sort of creates a stewardship and guardianship of the landscape. So every year we're building more and more folks who are really dedicated to preserving this ecosystem. Unfortunately, last year we were unable to have volunteers out due to COVID. Hopefully we'll be able to change that soon. But thanks to Olivia of our tech team today, we were able to go out and remove crabs. So that leads me to the very first poll question of the evening. Olivia, can you run that poll for everybody?
Yes, I'm running it now. So the question is, how many crabs were removed from Seadrift Lagoon in 2020? And I'll give you guys a couple seconds to answer that. And I just want to say that this project was the highlight of my year last year. Spending 4 weeks out on the water with Kate and like she said, I hope we can get volunteers out this year because it'd be really great for anyone who's interested to experience that. I'll give it a few more seconds. All right.
Interested to see what most people think here.
Yeah. Good guesses. Okay, I'm gonna close the poll and I will share the results now. And the correct answer was the 5,373 crabs. So between just Kate and I, we got that many crabs, which we were happy about those results. And with volunteers, hopefully we can get more next year.
Definitely. Thank you, Olivia. All right, let's move on to our next stop on our tour. Head over to Stinson Beach. Wendy, you're up.
All right, and nice work, you two. That's an impressive number. Kate, I've been out there with you too, and I've learned so much about invasive species and crabs. That's a really fun project.
Thank you. I know we have some of our volunteers in the audience too. So
that's a really fun day out there. But here we are, Stinson Beach, second spot on our tour. You know, Stinson, this is a 3-mile long sandy beach. You can see it in the photo there. It forms the ocean facing side of the sand spit. And when you're standing on that beach with the sand dunes behind you, you hear crashing waves and smell the salt in the air. You know, it's beautiful, and it's a surfing and beach party paradise. You know, if you look at that photo, that's classic Stinson in the middle of summer or maybe late summer. But if you know where to look in these kind of dune and beach habitats, it's also teeming with life. Right? So it's a really great habitat. In particular, the surf zone. It's not just for surfers. It's home to a ton of sand crabs and clams and worms, plankton. But that area where the waves crash is really bringing nutrient-rich water and oxygen to the area. So that's a really high area for life. All those little critters also are a big draw to hungry shorebird predators like the endangered snowy plover that nest in these little pockets of sand right on the beach or up in the sand dunes. And they're super hard to spot, but they're really, really cute. You can see the chick in the bottom left photo there. But really, really fun birds to spot on the beach there. But this is a highly visited spot. Most people know this beach if they know one spot in the area. So Sarah, what are its future challenges?
Thanks, Wendy. Well, as you mentioned, dunes are a vital part of beach habitats. They help diminish wave energy, they reduce shoreline erosion, they have all those amazing benefits to wildlife and people. But unfortunately, these important beaches are also being impacted by climate change. We're experiencing more frequent storms, our storms are becoming more intense, and they're becoming longer lasting. And all of these impacts are a direct result of climate change. And so it's driving bigger storm surges on top of rising ocean levels, which is further eroding sandy beach habitat that is really critical for protecting not just the natural environment, but also the homes in this area for sure. This photo was taken during what we call a king tide, which is the highest high tide of the year, on December 14th of last year. And this was just the day after our first afternoon at the Lagoon event. At that event, we encouraged everyone to check out the king tides and send us any photos they took. So thank you so much to Clint Graves, who took this photo and shared it with us. I think it's a really telling preview of what future sea level rise will look like for Stinson Beach. So the big question, Kate, is what can be done about this?
good question. I have an answer. Well, to address these impacts that you talk about, Sarah, the Marin County Community Development Agency is conducting a feasibility study for their Stinson Beach nature-based adaptation project. Through this feasibility study, they are assessing opportunities for how to help the beach and dunes adapt to sea level rise. Through the project, they aim to reduce impacts of flooding and erosion, improve habitat, especially for those cute little plovers Wendy pointed out, and maintain public access and recreation. If you'd like more information about the project, please visit marinslr.org. And Elaine and Olivia will drop that link into the question box. That now leads us to our first Stinson Beach trivia question. Okay, so instead of having a poll where you're going to use your mouse to click, we want you to use the question box and type in your answer to this trivia question. The person who answers the question correctly first will receive some Greater Farallones Association swag. So Olivia, can you help us with the question and read it out to the group for us?
Yes. So the question is, no bigger than your thumb, these tiny creatures spend most of their 2 to 3 year lifespan feeding under the sand. Labs use these critters in neurological studies because their tails have the largest sensory neurons found in any animal. Name this animal. And yeah, if you guys want to drop your answers into that question box, and it's just going to go to the first person who got it right.
We have some good swag, so you won't want to miss it.
All right, Kate, would we accept the answer mole crabs?
I believe so. What does everyone else think here?
Yes, definitely. Mole or sand
Yes,
definitely.
definitely.
First
Or
person to
crabs.
get their answer was Frederick. So we'll be sending you a private message for your information so we can send you that swag. And anyone who said sand crabs, mole crabs, you guys are all correct.
Oh, everybody knew that one. There's a lot of correct answers. It's one fast typer.
Wow. We have to think of harder questions for everyone. Well done, Frederick. Well done. All right, let's keep this tour moving. Our next stop, Kent Island.
All right. Well, it's our lucky day because we get to go out on Kent Island with Kate. Kent Island is a pretty hard place to go to, but when you go with Kate, she rows you out there on a little rowboat across the channel if you're lucky. At least that's what happened last time I went out there. But it's a short crossing from Bolinas to Kent Island. And Kent Island is a 29-acre flood shoal island. And it's called a flood shoal island because it forms when the flood tide comes in from the ocean and carries sand caught up in the water. And then the sand deposits right into the opening when it hits the calm water. So the island forms just inside the inlet of Bolinas Lagoon. And islands like this are typically very dynamic. They form and shift naturally with the waves and tides. And that's pretty important because these areas typically move sediment around the lagoon. But Kent Island is vegetated, so it doesn't shift as much as it used to. And this map here shows 8 different plant communities outlined on the island. And if you look, they follow a pattern of land elevation. And this is a pretty neat feature of wetland habitats. Vegetation follows this classic pattern because plants are highly tuned to the amount of seawater they live in. So you have a very gradual slope from water down at the top of the image to bare mud flats, which gives way to marsh and pickleweed, and then grassy dunes at the bottom part of the picture there on the island. So it's a beautiful island, remote, quiet habitat with a ton of wildlife. But Sarah, what challenges does it face?
Yeah, so actually it might be surprising, but not all of those plants are a good thing for Kent Island. And neither is the stability of the shoreline that those plants bring. So basically the island has been overrun with a number of non-native plants. A few examples here. These non-natives not only displace the native plants, but they also kind of artificially stabilize the island, impacting its ability to naturally shift, as you had mentioned. And so at Kent Island, what's happened over time is that all this non-native vegetation has captured a bunch of excess sediment and kind of anchored the island in place, causing it to grow in size and height and preventing that sediment from reaching other parts of the Bolinas Lagoon shoreline. And you can actually see in these images how the island has grown from 79 acres in 1959 up to 131 acres in 1998. This makes the island less adaptive to changes. It reduces its ability to maintain a diversity of habitats and species. So again, Kate, what's the solution here?
Okay, well, let me tell you. Again, it's us. It's the Kent Island Restoration Project. Way back in 2013, Marin County Parks started this project and partnered with Greater Farallones Association, the Greater Farallones Sanctuary, and Audubon Canyon Ranch to create a volunteer-led plant removal project on Kent Island. Basically, over 7 years, since we weren't able to have any volunteers last year, unfortunately, we bring volunteers out to the island and we remove a lot of those invasive plants that Sarah pointed out. And we've made some big changes to the island. This is a photo that shows some invasive lotus on the left-hand side, bird's foot trefoil. After we were able to remove the lotus, you can see on the right-hand side that some healthy stands of red fescue were able to grow in its place. The fescue is very important to the lagoon or to the island because the seeds feed voles on the island. And then various birds, foxes, coyotes feed on those voles and up through the food chain. So the fescue is a really important vegetation on Kent Island. In this image, you can see how the shoreline has changed in terms of vegetation. On the left, it's dotted by invasive sea rocket. After pulling that sea rocket, though, in April 2016, you can see that the shoreline has allowed those native salt grasses to recolonize, really changing the look and feel of the shoreline there. Another great benefit of the project is the fact that we've been able to increase the return of some rare plants, including pink sand verbena, those two photos on the left there, and then salt marsh owl's clover on the right-hand side. And we had a couple questions from some of our past volunteers asking us what the island looks like since we were not able to perform any volunteer activities last year. And thankfully, the island is in really good shape, especially the areas we worked in 2019. We did notice that some acacias and some pine saplings had cropped up. So I went out a couple times over the winter with a Marin County staff member. We were able to remove those. So hopefully we'll be able to have more volunteer events in the future. Lastly, another great thing about the project is that we're noticing some really good erosion along the shoreline. Normally, erosion is not something we like, especially when it comes to habitat types. But for Kent Island, it's a really good thing because it's indicative of those natural processes coming back and the island's ability to naturally shift again. And then, of course, I could not be more thankful for all of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers we've had over the years that have helped us to restore upwards of 20 acres on Kent Island. Speaking of that, how great this project is, that leads us to our next trivia question. So get your typing fingers ready. And Olivia, if you don't mind reading off that question for everyone.
Yeah. So you can just type your answers into that question box and I'll monitor them. And so the question is, colonies of this plant on Kent Island are the healthiest and most abundant in all of Marin County's open space preserve grasslands. Name this plant.
I know we've got some Kent Island volunteers in the crowd here, so I think this one will get answered.
I think we got our correct answer. Not a lot of guesses coming in though, but Tim Ribble said the red fescue, if I pronounced that right.
You got it, Tim.
Tim will reach out to you for your info so we can send you that swag.
Well done, Tim. Tim is a longtime Kent Island volunteer, so it's great to have you here. And so is Frederick, actually, from the sand crab answer too. So got a lot of great followings through Kent Island. All right, let's continue on our tour. Let's head on up to the north end of Bolinas Lagoon.
Okay, so here at the north end, we're now in the farthest reaches of Bolinas Lagoon, but also a pretty visible spot from Highway 1. And when you're driving along the shore in this area, you can see the water's quiet and calm, shorebirds feeding in the mud flats. And if you look carefully and safely when you're driving, you might spot a creek draining into the lagoon. These creeks are really important. They bring supplies of mud and silt that comes down from the mountains and deposits them into the lagoon. And we need that for healthy marsh habitat. The creeks are also important because they're spawning habitat for fish like steelhead trout, which are also endangered. In this photo, you can see the flow path of one of those creeks through the lagoon there. Yeah, Kate's pointing them out. It's a really neat spot. But Sarah, what challenges does the North End face?
Well, those culverts that actually direct the streams under the area's roads effectively block fish migration, and they disconnect water and sediment flow between the wetlands and the streams. And then the roads themselves, of course, prevent habitat from being able to move inland in response to rising sea level. This map that Kate's just pulled up, if you can see the squiggly green line, that shows the current shoreline, the mean high water tide line. The yellow line, which is kind of the next one up, is what scientists predict where the coastline will be in the year 2050. And then the orange line is where we predict the coastline will be in the year 2100, which is less than 80 years from now, which is hard to imagine. And keep in mind, these sea level rise projections do not include storm surges or flooding caused by upland creeks during heavy rains. And in fact, flooding is already a huge problem in this area. As you can see from this photo here, which shows the yellow and black markers where one of the creeks, Lewis Creek, normally flows underneath the road through a culvert and empties into the lagoon. So Kate, how are these challenges being addressed in the North End?
I'm so glad you asked, Sarah. Well, Marin County Parks is working to restore the entire north end of Bolinas Lagoon. And part of that effort is through the Bolinas Y Wetlands Resiliency Project, which will remove the crossover road right here. It will realign Olima Bolinas Road so that it's easier for north and southbound traffic to turn off. And then it will also reroute Lewis Creek so that it's back on its historical floodplain and more naturally flows into the northern portion of the lagoon. The project seeks to reduce flooding, enhance sea level rise resilience, restore wetlands and upland floodplain, improve roadway safety. For more information on the project, you can email Veronica Pearson, who is the Marin County Parks Project Manager, and Olivia or Elaine will drop her email into the questions box for you. All right, we're gonna head from the north end now and make our way down to the south end so that we can talk to you about our exciting plans for restoration efforts down in this special area of the lagoon. So Wendy, why don't you take it away?
All right, thanks, Kate. Well, this is an area pretty near and dear to us, and a place that I've spent a lot of time with you two, Kate and Sarah.
This is very true.
Fun time falling in the mud out there.
Yes, yes.
On this shore, but it is a really beautiful place on the lagoon. This shoreline is on the, we showed you Stinson. Now we're on the other side, the lagoon side of the large sand spit at the that forms the south shore of the lagoon. And the water is much calmer here, right? Because we're in the lagoon, not facing the ocean. But when you're walking along the sandy shore, it's a veritable bird paradise. You can spot marbled godwits, and they're using their bills to pierce the wet sand and look for worms. You can see egrets, like in this photo, elegantly resting on the mud flats. And just offshore, if you're lucky, and we've spotted these out there, you can see hundreds of pelicans dive bombing into the water for fish, and they dive bomb at 40 miles an hour. It's really amazing. And we were out there trying to look at erosion and take sediment samples, and it's so loud when you hear them hitting the water.
It's distracting. Yes,
beautiful
the
and
landscape is so
distracting.
beautiful.
Yeah, and a really, really amazing thing to see. And it happens all the time out there. But why is it such a bird paradise? We kind of talked about it before, but it's due to this vegetation pattern. So right here on the south shore of the lagoon, there's this broad, gradually sloping shoreline that has that vegetation pattern. A smooth transition from the water to mudflat to marsh to sandy upland grassy habitat. But these areas that transition from one zone, which is water, to the other, which is land, are really important to the overall health of the lagoon, and so are those adjacent habitats. But they provide a couple of really vital things. So I'll list them. The first is critical habitat. Right? Some species only live in these transition areas. They're really highly adapted to live part of the time in the water. Number two, these areas are refuge for wildlife. And some beautiful ones down there that Kate just popped up. But the transition zone is like a ramp out of the water during extreme tides and storms. Right? It's an escape route. That's increasingly going to be important with sea level rise. So the third thing these areas provide is an erosion and flooding buffer. That's also good for sea level rise. Marsh vegetation reduces wave energy. When the waves run up, they dissipate in the plants. The plants trap sediment. So that can actually grow and stabilize the shoreline. And this is the only kind of habitat that does that. So it's really special for that reason. The fourth thing these areas provide is a natural water treatment facility. They filter nutrients and runoff, prevent them from causing issues in the water. Number five, they provide carbon capture and storage. And that is, all the gas we emit from our tailpipes driving our cars around is causing it's releasing greenhouse gases and causing global temperatures to rise. Marsh habitats actually absorb atmospheric carbon dioxide and lock it away for centuries. So this can offset, the emissions that we create. Lastly, these areas are amazing for recreation and wildlife viewing. That's because a healthy habitat is one we can all enjoy too.
Yes.
Well, Wendy, unfortunately, the majority of the South End's shoreline has become highly eroded over time, in part because of human activity in the lagoon and also just the increasing pressures from sea level rise and storms. And so this creates you can see the top two photos. A lot of the shoreline, unfortunately, instead of that nice gradual sloping marsh that you just told us all the benefits about, the shoreline now is looking like this really steep embankment. And so we've basically lost a lot of marsh along this portion of Bolinas shoreline. And so now the shoreline can't support those biodiverse plant communities that it once could. Now, there are portions of the shoreline that do still have kind of healthy, wide wetland habitat, but even these areas are increasingly being drowned out by high tides, with water often breaching the back of the marsh and sometimes spilling onto the nearby road. So over time, sea level rise and increased storm surge will just continue to exacerbate these problems along this really, really special South End shoreline. This will reduce the available space for wildlife and plants to migrate upslope in response to sea level rise. It will deplete refuge, food, and nesting sites for fish and wildlife. And all those benefits you mentioned, like carbon capture, that can't happen if we lose the habitat. And so without healthy habitat, we know we can't have a healthy Bolinas lagoon. So clearly, this is a really critical piece of the shoreline for us to focus on. And Kate is now going to tell everyone about our current and upcoming work here.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay. So this is where I really want to talk about those nature-based approaches, because that's really at the center of what we plan here down at the South End for our South End Living Shoreline project. More recently, there's been a new movement in conservation to use nature-based approaches in order to address environmental impacts. And Greater Farallones Association and all of our partners have really joined that effort. Nature-based techniques utilize innovative solutions with natural construction materials, whether that's woody debris, native plants, even oyster shells, to help nature and work with nature in order to allow it to naturally evolve and adapt to future challenges. So this photo here shows what a living shoreline looks like. At the south end, it's very important for us to restore this transitional habitat that Wendy and Sarah were talking about. It's really critical for the long-term health and resilience of Bolinas Lagoon. As Sarah said, this area already faces a lot of impacts from flooding and erosion. So through our project, we hope to rebuild those critical habitats to not only improve space for wildlife to escape as water levels rise, but also to help the area adapt to climate change impacts such as flooding from storm surge, and reduce erosion, like what's happening along a portion of that shoreline there that's making that steep embankment. And then on top of that, we also want to use nature-based solutions so that we can preserve those ecosystem benefits that both Wendy and Sarah were talking about. So this here is a photo, a project map for the South End Living Shorelines project. The colors in the map depict the elevation of different habitat types. So you've got the dark blue, which represents subtidal, all the way up to orange, which represents upland habitat. The white dashed line on the left-hand side is the area of the shoreline that Wendy was talking about that had that really nice gradual slope. The black dashed line is the area where you've got that really steep embankment of shoreline, as well as those wetland and marsh habitats that are being inundated over and over again with water through storm and high tide events. So this is the area where we hope to restore the natural processes, enhance habitat, safeguard those environmental and ecosystem benefits, and then also provide really important habitat for various species so that they can also withstand any challenges from climate change impacts. If you're interested in living shorelines, how they're used and how they benefit both human and natural environments, come to our third event, because we will dive deeper into the concept of living shorelines, nature-based solutions, and talk much more about this South End project. All right, so speaking of the South End, I think we need to have another poll. What do you say? We've got one already queued up. So Olivia, if you don't mind running that poll, we can keep everybody's brains churning and see what people think of this next question.
All right, here we go. So this poll question asks, this frequent visitor to the South End is the logo of the National Audubon Society. So you can choose between any of those four, and I'll give you guys a couple seconds to get your answers in.
Hopefully it's a little tricky for some people.
I think it might be.
Let's hope so. I know that some of the breeding plumage of this particular bird was used as feathers in women's hats back in the day. So the National Audubon Society, that was really their first charge, was to keep birds' feathers from being used as little adornments. And from there, obviously, they've done so much more. But thanks to this particular critter, that's been their logo for well over 100 years. It sort of represents the face of the National Audubon Society.
All right, thanks for the fun fact.
No problem.
It looks like I stabilized. All right, here and are the results. So it looks like a majority of you chose between great blue heron or snowy egret, but the answer was great egret. So Kate, I think you did.
Stumped them.
Jumper.
Finally. You got to learn one small thing here at least, right? Awesome. Thank you so much. But let's not be finished with our polls yet. I think we should do one more poll before we go to our question and answer period. What do you think?
Yes,
I think so.
definitely.
Why not?
All right, I'm going to launch our last poll.
Okay.
And so this question is, how many cars are removed from the road per year thanks to Bolinas Lagoon's ability to lock up carbon in its tidal marsh? So,
Great question.
a couple seconds. That is a great question.
The lagoon serves so many purposes.
Gotta love the carbon sequestration.
Yes, absolutely.
All
Keep
right.
those cars off the road.
Looks like the numbers are leveling off, so I'm going to go ahead and close the poll and share the results and the answer. And you guys are mostly correct. It is 44 cars per year.
So smart. So smart.
That was a
And
good
that
one.
includes every single trip that those cars make, right, Olivia?
Yes, it does.
Hey, that's a lot. I love that. All right, well, thank you so much for joining the trivia poll portion of our tour for today. I hope that you all have been entering some questions into the questions box. We will start our question and answer period right now. I think we have at least a few minutes to get to some questions. And Dr. Wendy, I think you're going to be the one to navigate the questions for us. So if you don't mind.
Yes, I have the questions open here, and Olivia's been sending them, texting me some of the ones to prioritize. So we have the first one. How did green crabs get introduced, and will we ever get rid of them completely in Seadrift Lagoon?
Good question. So green crabs originally came from Western Europe, most likely hitchhiking their way in the ballast water of ships, and then eventually made their way into San Francisco Bay, where they were first recorded in 1989. And since then, they've really spread up and down the entire coast. So I don't know exactly when they first arrived in Seadrift, but we have been removing them since 2009, like I said. Complete eradication, I think, is pretty difficult to achieve. The more realistic goal, I think, is that what we want to do is, number one, we want to keep the health and biodiversity of Seadrift Lagoon. You know, we want those shrimp and fish and whatever other species that can thrive in Seadrift Lagoon to do so. And if they can live alongside a few green crabs, then that's okay, as long as that ecosystem can sort of sustain itself. The second thing we also want to do is reduce the threat of green crabs really spreading into Bolinas Lagoon. Thankfully, I do think that the project that we implement every year achieves both of those goals. But I think ongoing monitoring, ongoing removal, and definitely continuing to analyze the genetics and the population dynamics between Bolinas and Seadrift is going to be important into the future. Hopefully that answers your question there.
A great answer, and I think your numbers certainly show great progress and great work there. It's really impressive. We have another question here, and this one goes straight to Sarah. How do marshes sequester carbon?
Oh, that is a
question.
That's a great question. Yeah, and I will try not to talk forever because I find what we call blue carbon to be very fascinating, and it's basically refers to traditionally the sequestration of carbon by coastal plants, primarily salt marshes, seagrasses, and mangroves. Although the concept of blue carbon is extending now to whales because they actually end up fixing a lot of carbon in their bodies and take that carbon down to the deep sea with them. And kelp as well can sequester carbon, and some of it is ripped off and ends up being deposited in the deep sea as well. But specific to salt marsh plants, so they are able to fix atmospheric carbon in their tissues, and a lot of that material ends up being incorporated into the sediments that are anchoring the plants in place. And once that carbon gets into the sediments, into the below ground biomass, it stays there because that mud is anoxic. And unlike when a tree decays in a forest, a lot of that carbon gets back into the atmosphere. This carbon, when it decays, it's under the water, it's in this anoxic mud, and it's going to stay there. And it stays there for a very long time unless someone, us, ends up digging it up and converting it into some other land use. And that's really the only way that carbon is getting back into the atmosphere. So if we just leave these habitats alone, let them do what they do naturally, they are extremely, extremely effective. And I think I had a statistic somewhere that would be cool to share. Oh yeah, I remember. Globally, salt marshes around the world sequester 856 million metric tons of carbon dioxide a year. That is the equivalent of 12% of the United States annual emissions.
Wow,
So it is
that's
not
impressive.
insignificant. And that's just salt
No.
marsh. So if we combine that with all the other habitats that can fix and store carbon, it is a viable piece of the climate change solution.
Wow,
Wow,
that's amazing.
that's
And
great,
just
Sarah.
by it existing, that's pretty amazing.
Mhm.
Well, we have, my phone is blowing up with questions. I'll take
All right,
a
let's do a couple more. We're getting close to 7, so I want to be mindful
Okay.
of everybody's times, but I do want to hear more questions. So.
There's a quick one here that I think I'll tackle because I think it's an important one. How do you protect snowy plovers from all those human feet? And I think this is a great question. And snowy plovers, they nest in little pockets, you know, little like footprints really in the sand, and they lay 3 little eggs in there. But it's, I think, you know, when we're on the coast and we're on the beach, it is important to think about how we, you know, how our presence interacts with wildlife. And one rule of thumb that I really like is when the animal notices that you're there, you're too close. You know, if you're looking at a seal and it looks at you, or birds on the shore start, even the minute they all turn, if you see a whole group of birds or animals on the coast looking at you, they're like a deer in headlights, and they're spooked and they're ready to flee, and that wastes their energy when all they're trying to do is eat and rest too. So I think one thing, you know, keep that rule in mind. And when you go to a beach, check out the signs. There's signs to protect specifically snowy plovers at certain locations like Ocean Beach and other places, and paying attention to those, and staying away when you can spot them, and giving safe distance for wildlife is a really important thing that everyone can do when we're on the coast.
So there's
So-
literally signs on the beach, but then also the birds themselves give you a sign.
Yeah, exactly. Good, Kate.
Nice,
I
got it.
like that.
Okay. All right,
Okay,
let's
so
do maybe one more. Is that okay?
okay, oh, tough one. Okay, how about this one? I can see on my screen. Why are you focusing your next project on the south end?
Good question. I can take that one. I think the quick answer is that the south end is really well suited for creating a gradually sloping transitional habitat. The south end is one of the remaining areas around the lagoon shoreline where you've got this wide stretch. In some places, it's almost 200 feet of shoreline there. Although it's a steep embankment, that means that there's plenty of space to create that gradually sloping transitional habitat so that we have the great mud flats to the low marsh, mid marsh, and then up to the upland areas, so that as water levels rise, there's plenty of space there for vegetation and for wildlife to kind of migrate upslope. So that's the quick answer right there in terms of the south end. Also, you know, the project itself really contributes to our shared vision of a healthy, resilient, adaptable Bolinas Lagoon ecosystem. So I think it fits in really nicely with all of the other work that's happening in the lagoon. And when we have our third event, we can also talk to you about some of the guidance documents that we use to prioritize and implement projects at Bolinas Lagoon. The South End project is taken directly from one of those guidance documents. So it's already been vetted and sort of community supported in that sense. So not only do we have some of the backing from people, but we also have a great opportunity with the available space down there in the South End.
Great, and come to our third event and learn a lot more.
Perfect
Right,
little
but I
plug,
think,
right?
that probably is the last question we had. It's 7 here, so take it away, Kate.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Wendy. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everybody's questions, but we will definitely be compiling them, and we want to reach out to you and provide you answers. Maybe we can give some answers at the next event, or I'll just be happy to reach out to each of you individually. Okay, so we're gonna have just a couple of closing remarks from Deb. I wanna say thank you all so much to everybody who joined today. And Deb, why don't you wrap it up here for the rest of everyone?
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here with us and going on this magical tour. I know I learned a few things, which was exciting, and y'all did a great job. Thanks for everybody for sticking with us. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to letting you know when our next event is, when we're really going to be able to talk about the plans for the project in the South End. And we just really appreciate your partnership and your interest. Get in touch with us if you want to know more. Kate, thanks so much.
No problem. Thank you all. And I will be in touch with that link to this event on YouTube, so you can just watch us over and over and over again. Thank you all so much for joining us today for your magical mystery tour.